Alright, look, I'll start out by saying I know you guys want more of the Virago, and you'll get that. But here's the thing, something has begun happening to me recently, and it's changed me. It's the unfortunate effect of the fact that when you work for a motorcycle company, you begin to interact with different sides of the family of two wheels. I swear to God, after having my perspective opened up like this, I don't think there's a single bike out there that I don't either want to own or rip apart and put back together. In this case, I've gained more interaction with the distant, scraggly cousin of motorcycles, the Moped. And it's not like I was never around mopeds. I used to work for Revel Trends, and yes, I know that these blue turds incorrectly labeled mopeds as they lack pedals, but I'm actually referring to my coworkers there, many of whom were actual moped enthusiasts and club members, but I do digress. Tomos. Really quick history here. The name is a shortening of this in Slovenian, which translates to Motorcycle Factory Sežana. Sežana being the Slovenian town in which the company was born. You see, after World War II, because everything is connected to World War II, the Yugoslav government who ran the show at the time sought to develop new industries, which included a motorcycle company. They were able to do so via a licensing agreement with the Austrian company Steyr Daimler Puch, and thus Tomos was born. They pretty much just built Puch motorcycles until they were able to produce their own models, largely ranging from 50cc to 250cc. They also built cars for Citroen too. Really, they became what we know them to be now, as Americans at least, when they dropped the A3 automatic 50cc engine and all the models that featured it starting in 1973. They were successful enough to develop a new engine called the A35, which further improved on the A3's design in the 90s. Then in the mid-2000s, I believe like 2006, they released the A55, which is what we'll be working on in this very short series. There were new models up to and beyond this point, but many models in their lineup didn't actually change much throughout the years, which leads to some great compatibility matrices and, some classic looks with modern reliability. In 2013, Tomos ceased production due to struggles, but then it came back for 2017 and 2018, but was bankrupt by 2019. Yeah, man, they didn't even get the excuse of the pandemic killing them off. Unfortunate, but in this case, they live on through me. This is my 2007 Tomos LX top tank with an A55 engine. The uninitiated probably recognize this shape as that weird moped you see like chained to a pole that's oversprayed neon yellow or something and never moves until one day it's just magically gone forever. Actually, it's kind of funny because after writing that joke, I realized that wait, this very bike was actually tied to a pole for the better part of 2 years. Alright, how did I get it? Well, this bloke on Marketplace, he had it posted not running for $1,000, which was not going to happen. So, of course, it sat on there long enough to get dropped down to $700, which was not going to happen. So I go in and I weigh $500 and I pick it up like 2 hours later. If I'm honest, it's actually worth $300 or two, but new fucking York fucking city, right? So how did I get it home? Well, I just shoved it in the backseat of my Oldsmobile Bolt. I didn't even have to take it apart to do it, so that was nice. And that was on June 11th. This is the first year of the A55 LX, so it features a 50cc, 3 horsepower, piston port, 2-stroke engine with a 2-speed automatic transmission. It's an extremely efficient and well-made power plant with a lot of knowledge having gone into it over the decades. A few points I want to make beforehand though. This build is going to be quick. Actually, the bike is already done by this point. So this is just me going back and doing something with all this damn footage. I only want to make 2 or 3 episodes max, but I'm writing this as I look at the footage, so we'll see where we end up. Also, I built the bike mostly indoors because this was during that long-ass heat wave we were experiencing, and plus this shit is like light enough to carry up and downstairs, so I might as well take advantage of that. This will affect the lighting in some cases, but enough of that, let's get this thing running just to get a baseline. Now, I was quite positive that it was the usual suspects of bad fuel, clogged tank, clogged carb, clog lines. So let's just start right there. It's always a good place to start. It looks like there should have been like a snorkel or something connecting the carbs to the airbox, but on this bike it seems to be gone. But still, I removed the box so I can see things a little bit better. For this bike, rode hard and put away wet seems to ring true because look at all this grime and oil and shit that's stuck to it. I mean, I think some of that might even be dog hair, since it was attached to a pole. This is an Italian Delorto carb, which I had never heard of before, but it's all the same concept when it comes to cleaning it. I took the carb outside to hit it with some good old brake cleaner, just to get the big stuff off before I open it up. heard a little bit of something sloshing around in the gas tank, so I turned the petcock to on and reserve, but nothing came out in either case, confirming that it was indeed clogged up. Okay, so clogged up might be an understatement. With that said, I knew that I would have to rinse the tank out because all of this doo-doo slime would be at the bottom of it, just ready to reclog the carb. It's the typical quick and dirty rinse it till only clean water comes out. A bunch of rust came out too. Or maybe that's like the inner coating flaking off. I mean, I don't know. I mean, really, just clean it all. It's not rocket science. I like to use Teflon tape to help lock the threads and further seal them when I'm installing these. And with that, the petcock was operating with satisfying notches at each position. So with this being a two-stroke and all, we have to run specially formulated oil mixed with gas. Here I have, maybe a liter of gas. And I don't go too crazy with trying to get the mix right. I just throw a concoction together, just to get it running. I was able to confirm that the fuel was flowing to the carb, and by that point I was pretty sure it would start, but I wasn't sure if there was any ATF in the transmission, or at least if there was, what condition any ATF in it would be in. So I opened the drain, and to be honest, the ATF looked totally fine. I could have left it in there, but whatever. It has the typical filler bolt that you pour the ATF in. It's a little bit small, so you gotta kind of get creative for how you're gonna get it in there neatly. You know it's full once the ATF starts running out of this weep hole on the side of the engine. The first start was actually indoors. I didn't run it for too long. I just wanted to make sure it ran before I wasted time carrying it downstairs to take it outside. And yeah, it fired right up. So when I brought it outside, ran like normal. Okay, it didn't, I'm not saying it ran great, but at least I know that this thing works. I mean, it's got crazy air leaks. The header pipe is missing a stud, so it's barely even attached. But that didn't stop me from riding it to work and back home the next day. Hell, I went to both of my jobs. And while I was at Revel, I let the moped expert that I know take it for a spin. The lack of brakes scared him. Oh yeah, the bike really has brakes for several reasons. But anyway, I then used it to commute the next day. And when it was time to go home, that's when the bike decided, screw this, fix me. Because it refused to accept throttle at first, and then it just straight up stopped idling. Like it was 2 days in and I didn't even get to film any first person footage. I ended up just leaving it at work and putting it in my backseat to take it home again the following week. I actually pulled the engine out at Revzilla just to make it a little easier to pull out of the car and move around. I mean, the bike only weighs about 110 pounds and the engine is maybe like 25 pounds, but so the bike is up in my studio for a full teardown. And I'm already doing my first round of parts shopping on a website called Treatland, which I'm going to be using a lot for this build. And I tell you what, it's a bizarre website, but I like that. Yeah, just visit it yourself and you'll see exactly what I mean. But anyway, I put on some video game speedruns and I got started. Tank. Seat and storage tray. Luggage rack. I started to remove the taillight, but some rusted bolts and other jank on the light so that I had to remove the rear fender and harness with it, alongside the rear wheel so I could get to all the bolts. This is the voltage regulator, rectifier, and flasher relay. Swing arm. Shocks.
Also Sonic Series speedrunner. Super excited to be here. What's up,
I gotta be honest, this swing arm looks like my lard ass would fold it on a good pothole. And that's even if it wasn't literally falling apart from all this rust that you can see. It looks like the trunk floor on like a 1970 Buick up north. Yeah, I think I'm good on reusing this. Moving on to the headlight, cables, and the entire front end, really. Unlike motorcycles where the fork yokes have like threads built into them, everything on this front end has an external nut that you have to keep track of. By the way, being able to work on a bike in pajamas under the air conditioning while listening to something you want to hear is fucking underrated. Center stand, finally. And with that, the frame is completely stripped down to its birthday suit and it's ready to be built back up. So in the meantime of waiting for my Treatland package to show up, I cleaned up every square inch of the mainframe, and I went with a sort of vintage race car package of stickers. I also got a few free moped-related stickers from Treatland along with this really big order. You know, that red box is a big bore kit for 70 cc's, by the way. So let's start with the main components. I ordered a set of heavy-duty chrome shocks with adjustable height, a chrome full-box swing arm, because remember the old one is just like a flimsy stamped piece of metal. I have a longer center stand from motion-left mopeds to accommodate the potentially longer shock setup, you know, if I adjust the shocks to be longer. But right now, the really cool stuff is the EBR hydraulic fork upgrade that has provisions for a disc brake setup. See, originally this came with a fork that's just like spring operated, and you know, it has a drum brake. Also got a brand new headlight and horn, so you can see I'm really trying to address the basic chassis characteristics first and foremost. So let's start with the triple tree. These upgraded fork legs mate with the original triple, but of course I needed to replace the bearings that flew out and rolled everywhere when I first removed it. The great thing is that I can reuse the outer races on the top and bottom, because to be honest, I didn't feel like tapping them out and tapping in brand new ones, so both actually cleaned up pretty nice with no severe wear. I used a bunch of white lithium grease for its anti-rust and waterproof qualities. I used all of the new hardware and some of the old hardware to put it all back the way that I remember taking it off. Having since driven this moped a few times, I'm happy to report that I could take my hands off the bars, like when I'm going top speed, and it tracks perfectly straight with no shake or nothing. The top triple and nut were a little rough, so I cleaned, I brushed, and I touch-up painted them, and I think they came out pretty good. Ah, yes, the EBR hydraulic forks. You know, I gotta upgrade the brakes on everything I touch, because these New York streets will catch you lacking. I gotta reiterate though, this was a lot of fun just vibing indoors, and plus all of these parts are actually super cheap, so even though this looks like a serious parts haul, honestly, I've spent just as much on simply a front end and like a wheel with brakes for a motorcycle build. So I noticed that the new box swing arm didn't get around the frame as is, so I grindstoned it like ever so slightly on each side to get it to fit. I'm talking like barely touching it. I put a dab of lithium grease on the mounts and I just slid it right on. And now for the shock factor. I cleaned up the bolts for them too. I actually have a rear tire for this wheel, but in my motorcycle mindset, I forgot to buy an inner tube. I ended up trying to reuse the old tube in the meantime, but I punctured it while putting a new tire on. To address the tube problem, I went to the Keystone Moped shop of NYC, the creatively named NYC Mopeds. I got a front and rear tube, admired a few bikes both inside and outside the shop, and I was ready to install a tube starting with the front. So this wheel is actually a OEM brand new front wheel for a Tomos Streetmate R actually, which is a very like modern motorcycle-esque moped produced by Tomos. You know, I don't really care for the looks, but it's got some really good parts like a disc brake setup, and also this wheel could be run tubeless like an actual motorcycle wheel. This package came with the brake rotor, the wheel bearings, the annoying like floating type inner spacer that you see on some wheels, and rotor hardware. Of course, the bearings go in the freezer, which makes it a hell of a lot easier to bang them in with a rubber mallet and a block of wood. And if you don't know, that inner sleeve thing just kind of floats around in there without an axle through it. I've seen that before on motorcycles. I futzed around with the inner tube for the front wheel and also punctured it. Again, because I straight up suck at mounting tires. I know I said that this wheel can mount a tubeless radial tire, but you need that style of tire and a valve that bolts to the rim. Neither of those things are in my possession. So I just waited until I could bring it to a moped shop and have them install both the front and back tires, because clearly I cannot. For the control setup, I wanted to run these same handlebars as they have this unique, like, chopper style inward bend to them. I don't know if the previous owner crashed this bike on both sides or if it was intentional. So I ordered a bunch of Tomos hardware to replace the old ugly fasteners, wherever I could. Let's install a center stand. As I mentioned, this is the MLM center stand, which is a little bit taller, so the bike doesn't fly off the stand because the wheel touches the ground, when you start it. I will soon replace this spring and touch up that bracket, because this is actually an engine mount bolt, so these things have to come off when the engine goes on. So I'll have a chance to do that. The center stand is useless without the front wheel though, so let's finally install that. Alright, I think that's looking good so far. Oddly enough, this banjo bolt was so tight that I needed a breaker bar to get it loose. Alright, stock gearing on these is 26 front, 28 rear in an effort to limit top speed. Same concept as a motorcycle. Drop the number of teeth on the rear, the top speed goes up at the expense of acceleration, and somebody put a 22 rear for that effect. But I'm going to go up, just a little bit to a 24 to get a little bit more acceleration, but keep the respectable top speed. I just wanted to delete the turn signal system front and back, delete the rear brake switch, and delete the high-low switch just to have low beam and taillight come on with the light on and off switch. Also wanted to make the harness look a lot cleaner as well, because it's a bit messy as is. Here's an example of cleaning it all up. Once I'm presenting you the complete bike, I'll talk more about the electrical. Alright, so now it's time for the scary part. It's time to work on the engine. So my plans are to replace the first gear clutch with what they call a jammer clutch from Treatland. Basically, it's an adjustable high stall performance clutch, which allows the engine to spin up faster before it engages. I plan to replace the second gear clutch with a more durable carbon line clutch as opposed to the original cork one that these come with. There's also a sprag clip that I was going to install, but ultimately I ended up not doing it. And finally, I have to install that 70cc air saw kit. I actually bought all new bearings and seals for a full engine rebuild, but my moped expert friend, he advised me that I shouldn't need to split the cases from his initial inspection of the bike. I took his word because, less work for me, I guess. Dude, this engine was just absolutely filthy. And of course, you gotta clean it up before opening it. You don't want that stuff getting inside of it. This is the ignition and sprocket side, and it's completely dry. No oil flows over here. There is a cover for this side though. It's just off from when I removed the chain. I noticed that the ignition system was oddly dirty, which made no sense because the cover closes off the rotor from any debris from the chain spinning. But upon giving the cover a really thorough cleaning, I noticed that there was a big chunk taken out of it, which means at some point in this bike's life, the chain had probably popped and slapped it. I ended up just JB welding that hole to protect the ignition from dirt and reinstalling that cover with new hardware. Moving on to the clutch side of the engine. So here's that jammer clutch that I mentioned. It comes with 3 sets of springs, all of different gauges and thus different strengths. This is a centrifugal type clutch, which means that as the engine spins, the springs get forced outward, which then causes them to causes the arms with the clutch material to grip what they call a clutch bell that they basically sit inside of. The bell is directly connected with the forward gears in the transmission, and that's what propels the bike. So this comes with 3 sets of springs because think about it, the heavy springs need more force to send the clutch arms outward, and thus the engine needs to spin faster to get engagement. Thus you get a more powerful launch and acceleration out of first gear. The strength of each spring pack is correlated to the diameter of the metal that it's made of. I went with the middle level for now. But knowing me, I'll definitely be back for the highest level one. You gotta let these new clutches sit in ATF for like a day or so. Here you can see the pedal shaft / kickstarter shaft / output shaft in the rear. And you can see the first and second gear in the middle and the first and second gear clutches inside the bell at the front near the cylinder. See how the clutch material isn't touching the bell housing yet? But those springs would kick them out if the engine was actually spinning over. By the way, it looks pretty clean in there, and the gaskets don't actually look too bad, which makes me think that somebody replaced that recently. Using a holder tool and the air impact gun, I blasted off the nut holding the clutches on. And then I did the same for the transmission. Second gear clutch is locked up behind a circlip. And I gotta be honest, but these original clutches actually had a really good amount of meat left on them. And I almost felt bad for taking them out. Oh, here's a transmission where you would hang that sprag clip that I mentioned earlier. The thing is, in my absolutely extensive research, I've never found anything that the Tomos community is more divided on than this clip right here. The clip is meant to reduce gear lash on shifts, but most people say, yeah, no, that clip more often than not just shatters within a couple miles and causes more damage to the gear teeth than just leaving it out. See, I bought one just in case my engine lacked it, which it does. Now that tells me that the original it probably did shatter in the life of the bike, which kind of turned me off from reinstalling one. Like, I guess you could say that this is the devil I know, but the next day I buttoned it all back up with the new upgraded clutches. I did notice that the bearings for the crank and transmission shaft that sit inside of the engine cover were a bit crunchy. What did end up working was using a map torch directly on the outside face of the cover behind the bearings, and then just slamming it down on a block of wood. Flew right out. For the record, the bearings weren't that rusty when they were in the bike. It's just from when I washed the cover with soap and water. Oh yeah, here's the new and old pedal shaft seal as well, and these are known to go bad. The new case gasket soaked in some ATF, and we're ready to bolt it back on with the new hardware. Okay, now for the final task for this episode, installing a 70cc Airsol big bore kit. This is done by simply replacing the head, cylinder, and piston along with the typical gaskets. But you'd have to do the gaskets regardless, so. There's a technicality with the studs here, but I'll explain that in a second. To be honest, everything looked reasonably fine. I cleaned off the base and stuffed the case to not drop anything into it. These little two-stroke engines need needle bearings at either end of the crank, and that's a consumable, so it should be replaced. So the kit comes with the piston, its rings, and the cylinder. It also comes with the head gasket, base gasket, and intake and exhaust gaskets. God, look at it, it's so clean. I mentioned the studs earlier, and basically the issue is that this kit only fits M6 studs, but apparently these engines run M7 studs. So the solution is to use studs that taper down from M7 after the block to M6, you know, all the way up to the top. And I was ready to install them, but get this. My case already had the taper bolts in them. Anyway, with that lucky fact, I went to begin the sandwich with the base gasket. To be honest, the base gasket that came with the kit didn't really match the case so much, so I had to cut the transfer ports out a little bit more and then just wet it with some two-stroke oil. The rings were actually already on the piston, which was, you know, good for me, as I didn't have to fiddle around with getting them on. In fact, I just honestly took it for granted that the gap would be fine versus trying to get them off and back on. You know, I never really knew how two-strokes worked all that much, if I'm honest, and by this point I knew via research and actually working on one. But if you're kind of like me, and like, you know, when I removed the head in this video, you asked like, whoa, where's the valves and the cams? You know, there's this really excellent video by Tinman Saws where he uses a cutaway to break it down. You know, two-strokes are kind of a lost art for street riders of my age, so after this video ends, you know, in a few minutes, check it out. That's your homework, for the young guys at least. Alright, head gasket and a tiny dab of anti-seize paste. Damn, I love these fins. I think they look great. I didn't torque the head nuts to spec because if I'm honest, I couldn't find my torque wrench at the moment, but I'll do it later. I do a quick compression test before installing it in the frame, and installing it just requires 3 bolts.
Suck.
I absolutely love where this bike is going visually. Looks competitive as fuck. You know what? Actually, let's get the exhaust on before we close this out. I feel like that's a better endpoint. So this is the MLM Cali pipe, which is up there as basically one of the best ones you can buy. It's relatively expensive, but it's one of those pipes that actually fit the way they're supposed to and don't explode after just, you know, a few miles. Gotta love that giant expansion chamber in Stinger. So I grabbed the bike and I had to layer down to get the exhaust studs in there. And I gotta be honest, I don't know if regular blue Loctite really does anything in such a hot application as an exhaust stud. But to be honest, I tried it because I'm really tired of exhaust studs eating themselves down the road. I'm looking at you, K-Bike. You get them on by tightening a nut against the nut on one side of the threads. God, you gotta love how clean this all is. For now. I actually torqued down the exhaust studs, and then I came back as promised to spec torque the head nuts. Then I went to the back hanger and put some bolts in. I actually did something pretty clever, because see, the swing arm that I'm running is much thicker than the stock one, so it was kind of rubbing against the pipe. So I put a torque nut between the exhaust hanger and the frame on each bolt, and then I put more nuts on the end. So at that point, you know, a nut a nut length is enough to make it clear the swing arm, and I think that should do pretty well for vibration too. All right, here's how the bike stands at this point. Pretty much night and day from when I first got the bike. As to not cheat, I even put the harness back on the bike and it still looks pretty clean. With that, the bones of the bike are set, but there's still a few more things to do. As I mentioned, the bike is already finished, so the next and final episode is definitely going to be a lightning round of sorts. That next episode is going to come out very shortly, so make sure you come back for that. So yeah, you just watched the Illustrator, and this is my Tomos A55 moped build. I'll see you on the next one.